right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. Thank you for listening, wherever you're listening from across the Aloha State. Today's episode, we're going to break down the ERS computation, the employee retirement system for our state of Hawaii and city and county workers. Just focusing on the computation, how that's calculated, things to consider, the different plans, the different dates. Paul, how are you doing today? You ready to jump into this?
Yeah, let's get started. Been doing pretty good. It was a good week. We're leading into the back half of the year, right? Fourth quarter is here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
excited.
Awesome. So I think to kick this off, best place to start would be how about you just break down the parts to the computation, give us an overview of how it's calculated. It's very simple, very similar to our FERS computation.
Yeah.
And most of our listeners probably understand, but it's a good little refresher just to go over it.
Absolutely. And to me, this is a critical part of just how to get an estimate of what your benefit's going to be from working for, like you said, working for the federal government, or in this case, we're going to be talking about the ERS, or the being a state or city and county employee. So here's how it works. Really, there's three components to this computation. So the first one is going to be what's called the multiplier. So what a multiplier is going to be a percentage, and that's kind of going to be based off when you were hired. And we'll break that down a little bit more further. So that's the first component. It's called the multiplier. The second component is going to be your years of service, right? So, if you work for 25 years, you work for 30 years, or whatever that number is, that will be the next computation piece of that. And I would say out of anything, in a lot of cases, that's the number one thing that we control, right? Is how long we work. And the last part of that computation is what's called the average final compensation, right? So your last, or excuse me, it doesn't have to be your last. It's the average of your highest compensations from your tenure. A little thought there. That's kind of something that you can control too, just depending on like your raises or things like that. Or maybe and some people actually pick a job that kind of gets them to a higher piece towards the end of their working career. So anyway, with those three things, the multiplier, years of service, and the average final compensation, those multiplied will be an estimate of your annual benefit.
Yeah, the terminology of average final compensation is kind of misleading, because when you hear average final compensation, you're thinking of my last compensation, but it doesn't have to be your last compensation. It's just the average, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, right? So maybe just break down a little bit more about average final compensation for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just read what comes off of the ERS website. So it's important to note that we've talked about these dates in the past, but knowing whether you were hired after June 30th, 2012, or whether you were hired before July 1st, 2012. So depending on when you were hired, it will be different. But the definition is the same, right? So average final compensation is the average of your highest years of base pay earnings, excluding any lump sum vacation pay, right? So depending on when you were hired, right? So if you're hired after June 30th, 2012, the computation is the average 5 highest years, right? So you have to take the 5 highest years. Now, if you're hired before July 1st, 2012, that drops down to 3 of the highest years of your earnings. So it's really important to note the difference, but the calculation is the same because it's based off the same type of average, but it's just whether it's 5 or 3 years is going to be the biggest difference.
Right. Those dates come up so much in the ERS when you're talking about years of service and computation is that's like the big pivot point for that hybrid plan. We brought it up several times, but
yeah,
no, that's great. Average final compensation. We got our years of service, pretty straightforward. So how about we just go into the multipliers for the different plans?
Yeah, absolutely. And the multipliers basically it ranges pretty pretty much across the board of different types of jobs. And so I'll just start with kind of like the bigger ones, and then I'll get to the hybrid and the general employee, because that's going to be the one I'm going to focus on for the rest of the conversation. But so you got your elected and legislative officers, right? So again, those are the people that make these rules and things like that. So again, if you're hired before July 1st, 2012, that percentage is going to be 3.5%, right? So, and that's kind of like the largest number that you're going to have. And especially, I don't know if we want to compare and contrast, but if you compare that to like the federal side, federal is at the highest is 1.1, right? But most of the part it's 1%. So with that, if you're after June 30th, 2012, it's 3%, right? So just depending on when you were hired, right? We can't really control that because we can't go back in time. But so if you're hired recently, in this particular position, it's 3%. Moving on to judges. Judges is the same. So if you're hired before July 1st, 2012, it's 3.5%. Or after June 30th, 2012, it's 3%. With the caveat that as a judge, it cannot exceed a 25% of your average final compensation. So basically that works out to approximately 25 years of service. You don't get any further benefit for being in a judge position. I didn't actually look it up. I don't know if judges sit longer than 25 years, but I mean, maybe they could. I'm not sure. To round it out, before we get back to the hybrid and general employee, you got your emergency people, right? So police, fire, public safety officers, right? So these individuals, if you were hired before July 1st, 2012, excuse me, it's 2.5%. And if you're hired after June 30th, 2012, it's a 2.25%, right? So again, a little bit difference there, about a 0.25 difference. But again, those are going to be the multipliers that you would put into that equation, right? And I know we've ran through some numbers pretty quickly, but if you fall in any of these, this is public information. The ERS has this. So if you're in these positions, that's readily available. So to wrap it up, I'm going to talk about the hybrid and the general employee, which I think probably, is the largest brush of employee types. So if you were hired before July 1st, 2012, you have a 2% multiplier. And if you're hired after June 30th, 2012, it's a 1.75 multiplier. So that's the multipliers. And so again, the computation is the multiplier. So if you were hired after June 30th, 2012, it's a 1.75%. And then your years of service and your average final compensation. So you take those three numbers, you multiply them together, and you get an approximate estimate of what your benefit would look like. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, yeah, that's great. So, we have a link on our website, HawaiiRetirementShow.com, useful links, and or you can go directly to ERS website, look at your handbook. And again, the hardest part of this whole thing is just figuring out which category you fall into, and then you just find your number from there. And it's interesting when you pointed out that the multipliers are much higher than they are in the federal. And my guess is, I would say on average, I think the federal employees probably get paid a little more.
Sure.
So that's why they probably get less of a multiplier, whereas the state might get paid a little less, but they make it up on the back end. So it's kind of interesting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about we close it out with just an example for the people in the hybrid plan? Because like we said, that's going to be the largest group of people.
Yeah, totally. So whether you're a general employee or in the hybrid system, your percentages and your dates, everything's pretty much the same. So absolutely. And the other thing I'll point out too is, in this example, I just, gave pretty random numbers. But the ERS website also has the ability to log in. So like if you've never logged in before, you can actually see your years of service. You can see a bunch of useful information, because I've talked to people like, oh, I don't even remember what exact day I started. So anyway, check out that ERS website. You can find those links on our website as well. So let's just jump into this to give estimated real numbers. So if you were someone who was hired before July 1st, 2012, right? And you worked for 30 years. So you had 30 years of service, whether you're a teacher or you work in some sort of hybrid or general employee system. Your multiplier is 2%, right? So again, you take the multiplier, 2%, you take your years of service, 30, and let's just say your average final 3 years is or your highest compensation is $75,000. I just used a round number there. So again, 30 years of service, 2% multiplier, $75,000 of your high 3 average final compensation. Your approximate benefit is going to be a little over $45,000. So that's pretty good, right? If you think about those numbers there, it's going to be 35,000. Excuse me, 45,000. I'm sorry.
45,000.
Yeah, 45,000 as an annual benefit. So if you divide that by 12, you'll get that monthly benefit as an approximation, right?
Sure.
So I'm just going to kind of move into the next one. So if you're hired after June 30th, 2012, and you still had that 30 years of service, right? Your multiplier is 1.75, right? So it's not 2%, it's 1.75. Your average compensation is now 5 years. So again, I'm going to use the same average compensation of 75,000. So again, in this example, right? So you're hired after June 30th, 2012. You have 30 years of service, a 1.75 multiplier with 75,000 compensation. Your annual benefit is $39,375 approximately, right? If those happen to be your numbers. So it's a little bit less, but still not a bad number.
Right.
But what I would say about both of these numbers is, that's not going to be enough typically to survive in retirement, possibly. So there's other things to consider there. But as this is just a computation episode, that's how we would figure out what your benefits approximately might be.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we can see it's still a great benefit, and there's nothing to bat an eye at, but it is about a $5,000, $5,600 difference if you came in after that date. Now, that's something you can't control. The pension benefit is just a great source of steady income throughout your retirement years, so it's great. But it is a little something to look at if you did come in after that date. It's $5,600 a year in retirement. That's something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this isn't, this episode's not meant to go much further than this, but this is why, for us, I would look at this is why planning opportunities come up, right? Because we can estimate this, we can do our best to just show the line item of here, this is what your benefit might look like, right? But there's going to be a shortfall. There's going to be something that we need to do other than that, right? And that's where the other programs come up, with regards to whatever system you're in, right? You have these other benefits that you can take advantage of. So, that's kind of my thoughts there.
Cool. Yeah. Any last words on the ERS computation before we close it out?
Other than just what I've said earlier, check out the ERS website. To be honest with you, you can actually log in, you put in your information, you'll see yourself on that system. Years of service is going to be there. If you have questions about these types of things, or you want to give some sort of estimate, reach out. We're here to answer questions. We're here to help, all kinds of members of the different systems here in Hawaii.
All right. Till next time.
Awesome.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta, Paul McWilliams, and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial or Inspire Advisors. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration. And for Paul McWilliams, investment advisory services are offered through Inspire Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC.